Good evening to you. Hey, volume's solid. Glad to see everybody tonight. Good crowd once again. We're thankful for you, thankful for a lot of good feedback, and I hopefully I've said this a time or two, but I hope we know I'm up here learning as much as anybody and need to learn as much as anybody about all this. And multiple times during the week leading up to or I'm not the one that needs to be teaching this stuff. So we're all in it together, and we're all trying to learn and grow together. So thank you for so much good feedback thus far. Be thinking about this. Once again, we mentioned it last week. We'll do something with it in the time to come, but just thinking about if you've got children at home, and it really don't matter their age. If you've still got them at home, we've still got some time. The Lord especially, where would the Lord's word have us to raise our children? And we know some big terms. We want them to be a Christian, yes. We want them to be faithful, yes. But begin to be specific in your thinking. Specific things, the more we can kind of chart a path that will help them to get there. All right. Consider the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, I don't know the exact pronunciation, CEO, founder of Amazon, shipping giant, warehouse giant, whatever you call it, I don't know, marketplace, online marketplace. And he founded it and CEO of it now. Several years ago, he was at some conference, and somebody kind of asked him about the future and innovation, that kind of thing. As you can imagine, that's his kind of wheelhouse. And he said he gets asked all of the time, what's changing? What's happening? What do you see happening in the future? What can we count on, maybe or guess is going to happen into the future? What's changing? He says that he rarely, if ever, gets asked what's not changing, what's the same, what's dependable. He says, though, what he's learned is that second question is actually far more valuable than the first. So he uses the example for his own company, for Amazon. He says people are always going to want cheap prices. No one's ever going to say, well, I can buy it from this company and it's going to cost me $20, and I can buy it from this company and it's going to cost me $12. And so he's saying one of the core values for his company is let's lean in that value that people are always going to want that. It's not going to change. That's a technology example, a secular example. Really doesn't impact us much, even though we probably all have used Amazon even somewhat recently. Harkens to a principle we mentioned a couple weeks ago, and one that we as parents must always remember, that there are things that are ever changing when it comes to parenting. Just think of the short spans of time in which our children do some fast growing and fast maturing. Things are always changing. Think about how different some things are in raising a child in this generation than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when we were kids, right? Things are always changing. And those things can get scary. But the key to be sure we're raising godly children is to lean on what's not changing. What God has made clear in His Word, what He says is important, what He says works, what He says will lead people, ourselves, children both, to Him. So let's keep leveraging what's not going to change instead of being afraid of what is constantly changing. Okay? I ran across that this week, and that's a principle we mentioned a couple weeks ago, so I just wanted to be sure we're reminding ourselves that's what we're trying to do. We're appealing to God's Word because it does not change. It'll help us to navigate any scary change we might face. Okay, so last week we talked about this, the importance of environment. If we're building an environment, that means that we don't have to put this pressure on ourselves to do every single thing perfect. We're building a culture. And the one word we've said needs to dominate that is that of trust. And so will we create godly home environments, one that ultimately trust God first, then trust each other, so that when our children grow into adults, they are choosing to build those same environments, leading even more souls to God. Proverbs 13, verse 20. We'll be in Proverbs most of the time tonight, but I think I've got almost all, if not all of our verses on the screen tonight. But Proverbs 13, verse 20, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. How about we as parents initially, at first glance, view this passage and apply it? Maybe especially if we've got teenagers. How do we think when you read this one? What's your first initial knee-jerk reaction to this text? Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, the companion of fools will suffer harm. Who you hang out with? Peer pressure, right? There's some truth to that. Like this, that's a true application of this verse. Are there other applications that might be noteworthy for us in our study? Okay, that's good. That's a great thought, Tori. Thank you for that. Yeah, we can raise our children to be those wise companions that are influencing other people instead of being constantly influenced by others who are foolish. That's great. That's a great thought. Be a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? We can raise them that way. Most basically, if our children are living in our homes, are we not a companion? So from the earliest of days, if we're going to be the ones who were raising them and spending all this time with them, I need to ask, am I wise? If I'm wise, then I'm helping my child become wise. If I look at parts of my life and I say, whew, not so wise there, the starting point is I need to grow in that wisdom. I need to grow in that faithfulness. So am I wise? I need to view a lot of these passages, when you look at especially in Proverbs, you see the word neighbors and others and companions and all that. We can make some application to any relationship. So we could apply this text to marriage, could we not? Apply this text to a business relationship. I mean, it's highly applicable. But the first question, am I wise? Am I worth people walking with me? Am I helping them be wiser? But to kind of connect the dots between our environment of trust, the next question should be, does my child trust with me enough to walk with me? Am I wise? Am I a source of wisdom such that's going to help my child avoid the dangers of foolishness? But will they trust me? We talked about that exercise, did that exercise last week with the 4 gentlemen and got some neat feedback in the days and week that has followed. And one thing that I didn't notice in the moment, and I talked about it with Danielle afterward, because Danielle, when we were at Midway together, she would have done that several times, especially one time she mentioned especially with Lonnie, the one that I learned it from. And so let's say I'd pulled Danielle up here too, she would have, quote, known the answer. And she could have gotten out in front, or she could have latched on to the person, and the other group could have looked across and said, oh, that's the way to do it. Wasn't that kind of what happened with the way it played out anyway? Sage and Ryan were doing something that then how Daniel and Nelson started out. So Daniel looked over and said, hey, I can do that. That should be an ideal and a way in which the church stands ready to help all families. We can look across the auditorium, we can get into each other's daily lives and see, hey, they communicate with their children in a way that I struggle with sometimes to do. I need to learn from them. I need to get out in front of my child a little more in that way and lead through trust. So we can learn what works when we are all in a trusting environment within the church. So that was one takeaway we didn't talk about, but I think helped. What else? Anything about that exercise? Experience-based learning. Yes, Roger.
Just going on that, like,
Yeah.
who do you want, teaching things?
Yeah.
For example, you're turning 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're wanting to learn how to drive.
Right.
And I go to your dad and I say, oh, he's going to teach you how to drive.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, let's go fishing. He said, no, I'm going to teach Joey how to drive. And I say, no, I've got a 16-year-old. He's got his license last week. He can teach him how to drive.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Who do you want him to teach him how to drive?
Yeah, that's good.
When you think about it.
Yep, that's great. That's a good point.
Oftentimes we're allowing
Yeah.
the peers,
Right.
and where does
Yeah.
that, are you walking with the wise?
Right, that's it. And that's something that, in a similar way, we thought through when we decided about where Hazel would go to school. A lot of younger families that we're associated with just agonize over whether to homeschool or whether to send them to public school. I don't think we lost a blink of sleep over it, because we're still the main teachers. Like, it doesn't matter where we send her to school, we're still going to be the main source of instruction. We're letting some who have some experience and some professional training do what. But either way, we're the primary teacher, and we're going to take that role seriously. And I don't say that to brag on ourselves, because it's a hard thing to do, but it's still not that big a deal. If we will as parents take the responsibility we're supposed to take. And if we put too much stock in the role of those, then we open ourselves up to what are they teaching them. They get up into junior high or high school and they're teaching them evolution, and well, if we're putting all the stock in teacher, then we might have a problem. But if we are constantly involved in that process, then we can have a way in which we can help with that and guide them no matter what they're exposed to. So yeah, who we as parents put them in proximity to and allow them to be entrusted with is a huge thing. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, smart and world's qualifications don't necessarily meet this definition of wise, do they? Yep. Yep. You have to get to a place of extreme tunnel vision, and it's crazy to be able to get those advanced degrees a lot of times, and it can be a scary thing. Ron?
Just to kind of drive on that point about evolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're coming back, I think we're coming back here.
Yeah.
We started talking, and he said, we've been studying about men coming from months.
Right.
And I said, well, we don't.
And so Paul's, just a minute, he's 10?
He's 10.
4th grade? 5th grade?
And of course, I'm sure, and I know his teacher, and I know that it's not being driven into his head, but it's in their book.
Right.
Okay, as a 10-year-old, unless you've done something to him to lose his trust,
Yeah.
trust in you by pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had this conversation on, well, he gets upset because the son you've grown up going to church.
Right.
But he said, well, it was in my textbook.
Yep.
The teacher
Yep.
told me that he trusted the people that wrote that.
Right.
Mind to him, and that his teacher was teaching him all right.
Yeah.
And we had to have that conversation.
Yep.
Because he was confused. It wasn't that he didn't believe, that he didn't believe what he was taught his entire life. It was, there was some confusion.
Sure.
And so what I learned from that is, it's not that he's going to believe somebody else over me, but there's people they're going to trust because they've gained their trust if they're in the school system.
Yes.
I'm not supposed to, and they have to know where the true wisdom is at.
Mm-hmm.
Even though those people are trustworthy, their information.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, that's huge. And you're not going to, that's going to take a lot of time still investing in him to be able to reinforce the truth. A lot of major principles there. It's scary. Now do that scenario with turning on the evening news at 5 o'clock. that's school, but how much worse can you hear and see just,
We turned it on
you know?
to watch the kids grow and expand.
Yeah,
And we counted the death toll like 45 by the time we got.
right, yeah,
That's all the numbers.
yep, yep. All right, very good. Any more comments? Thank you for sharing. Anything else? All right, I've already said this, but we're trusting God first. So in the example, the person in front is looking at the Lord, instilling trust in the one following. They're going to follow the Lord too. All right, Ephesians 6, verse 4. If we provoke our children to anger, that's breaking their trust. Yes, Edward.
That goes along with the 23rd Psalm.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's unwavering trust, isn't it? Yep. For provision, for safety, for his promises, absolutely. Very good. What if James 1:19 was our parenting mantra? Daily advice, daily habit when it comes to parenting. How would that relate to an environment of trust?
We should do it in every aspect of our life.
Yes, I mean James says every person, right? It's a James that we probably have memorized, but all still struggle to implement. How will it help build an environment of trust? Let's connect those dots.
We're told in First James, first 7:20, praise was patience,
Okay.
and every one of those bears the record of all patience.
Okay. That's good. Good thought.
You need to listen to your children.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Ryan found out there was a problem.
That's right. That's a great way to, yes.
Pay attention to what his son is talking about.
That's good.
Sometimes when you're too much in a rush, you're trying to fix dinner, we don't pay attention to what you're saying.
Yep. You're right. That's it. We as parents are prone to try to fix everything with talking. And if talking doesn't work, what do? We get louder, which is anger, right? So James says that's the last two steps that you're supposed to avoid. You're supposed to listen. Listening builds trust. Active listening builds trust. It's not just not talking. Quick to hear, quick to listen. So I had this slide up. Yes, Miss Peggy.
When a child comes to, no matter what age they are, and say, Mom, I want to tell you something. And you're washing dishes, when you finish dishes, we'll
Yeah.
listen and everything. But that time, that child has already got that because I always try to take the time. If
Yeah.
you can possibly stop, you take the time and listen to that child or explain to them. We'll talk about it, and I promise you we will, and you do it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
don't push them away because then they won't trust you.
Right.
They
That's it. Yeah. Even if you remember to go talk to them after you finish the dishes, how many times of them coming to ask will they keep doing it if we keep saying, hold up, wait a minute. Now, we have to also teach them respectfulness and don't interrupt and a lot of those other things too. But we need to be aware of their spirit and be sure we're not dousing it.
some won't
Yep.
even want to talk to you.
Right.
They'll
Yep.
might go to somebody else, and it might,
Oh, they will. Absolutely.
and it might be something
Yep.
very important that other
Yep.
people wouldn't think about.
Absolutely. Someone, and probably a lot of someones actually, have connected this concept of trust to a brick wall, meaning it's built one brick at a time. Okay? We're not just born into the world and boom, trust is just 100%. Right? And we read Psalm 22 last week, and what appealed to me about that was how he says, I learned trust from my mother. From the day I was born and began nursing from her, I learned to trust. And so that process starts from the moment they're born. And so we're building trust one brick at a time. And we all know the negative side of that you can tear it down in a heartbeat, and to rebuild it's going to take time. But let's just not get distracted by that. Let's just think in terms of constantly building trust one brick at a time. And this definition of trust we put up here last week is that it's built when someone is vulnerable and not taken advantage of. Vulnerable, but not yet taken advantage of. And the reminder must be that while they are still in our home, they are going to be vulnerable. No matter their age, they're going to have vulnerabilities that come with that stage of life. Just because they may be 13 and starting to develop muscles as boys and all those other things that happen when their bodies change, that does not mean they're no longer vulnerable. It probably means there are some things that they're even more vulnerable about, and they need some sort of structure and support more than they've ever needed it before. Same for young ladies, right? So we can look at some markers and say, oh, they're growing up, they're less vulnerable. But we need to be careful about that and always know that no matter the stage, they're vulnerable and must be, we need to be sure that we are there for them and with them no matter those stages. So how do we do that? Quick to hear. Brother Roger, any comments on Proverbs 20, verse 5? No, a favorite of yours, right? Yeah.
You have to put it in there to be able to.
You have to put it in there to be able to draw it out. That's good. Who is the one who can draw it out? A man of understanding, right? Purposes of a man's heart are deep waters. Do we view our children that way? That they have this life that's useful and precious and beautiful? How will we draw it out? Through understanding. Proverbs 18, verse 13. He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. Just think about that phrase. That is his folly and his shame. Parents, if we're quick to correct before we've fully and actively listened, and then this is our scripture reading, and I want us to think about this with trust quickly. Jesus has just said, fear the one who can destroy body and soul in hell. But then he closes that section, he follows that up by saying, fear not. God knows even down to the number of hairs on our heads. So he tells us not to fear because you are of what? More value. So what's trust? Trust is built when we're vulnerable and we're not taken advantage of. How much more vulnerable can we be than for someone to know every single thing about us? And God knows every single thing about us, down to the number of hairs. And he loves us anyway. He loves us because we are who we are. So we ask, why should I trust God? Well, that's a good summary right there. He knows everything in our heart, everything about our precious of all of my creation. So to build an environment of trust with our children, with our spouses the same way, is that we create and foster an environment where we know as much about each other as we can possibly know and keep growing in that knowledge. And it doesn't cut people off. We don't take advantage of that. We don't mistreat each other because of that knowledge. We don't take advantage of that situation of vulnerability. That's where we should be continuing to move toward. And that happens through listening. When we listen, we learn more about each other. Someone has said that, I think this was Henry Cloud, who has written a whole series of books called Boundaries. And so we may reference that later. But he says building trust is to connect through understanding, but trust is not actually built when we understand them. It's when they understand that we understand them. Right? If we take a math test with Teresa, it says, you only got half the questions right. Big fat red F at the top of it. And I come back and I say, but I know those that you marked wrong. I know those are right. No, she can't understand that I understood it because I missed it. Right? Until we each understand that the others understand. You get me? So Ryan, Brittany need to understand Lakin's situation and questions. But even more than that, he needs to know they understand the situation, right? And so that's where humility and listening really comes to play. And how he answers Lakin will be different than how he has answered Dax in previous situations, or Jaslyn, or Will Ryland. But that's how we ultimately go about building trust.
So we're lined up here and what we want to hear instead of what we're saying.
That's interesting. Did you hear, Brother Roy? We end up hearing what we want to hear instead of what's said. Yeah, that's the quick to hear. Actually listening, not deciding kind of what we want to hear.
Also, you can learn it from your parents. If you trust your husband, your husband trusts you. You treat each other
Yes.
the same.
Yes.
That's what we do in the family.
Absolutely. I agree. Absolutely. That's on my list of this question here. That's the first thing, my first answer on this question even. So very good, very good. All right. So let's talk briefly in our just final few minutes about what things break trust, okay? The overall answer to how to build trust is listening, actively listening and learning, understanding for the sake of understand, and are with them. We're, quote, team child no matter what, okay? We need to be aware of things that will break their trust, though, because even though it's going to take us time to build trust in certain areas, we all have our own weaknesses. And so we have to be patient with ourselves, patient with them, show grace and forgiveness, yes. But if we also allow some things that will directly break trust, see, that's hurting us while even we're trying to do better. And so if we go to the ER and we've got some internal bleeding, and I've also got a pounding headache, they're not worried about that headache. They've got to stop the bleeding first. There's something that will ruin my life, end my life quickly before they get to some other things. So if we're allowing some of the things that will break trust to happen regularly, we've got to cut those off and begin to cut them off as soon as we can, else it's going to undermine the whole process of getting better, okay? Proverbs 3:29, do not plan evil against your neighbor, against your child, against your spouse, who dwells trustingly beside you. They trust you, so don't take advantage of that trust. All right? Whoops, that's my answers. Anybody have anything that stood out over the past week as you've thought about this question? We tossed it out there. What things break an environment of trust in the home? Okay, anger. Okay, that's come up already a little bit. Uncontrolling of emotions.
Brandon and I just talked about being, on the same page and being consistent with what we do.
Right. Between each other. That's good. That's a great thought.
Not undermining the other person.
Yes.
Or patting or petting the other person.
Yes. Yes. So will a husband and wife parent the child the same way? No. In every situation, probably not. But there's so much trust between spouses that whatever you deem you need to do in this situation, I'm behind you. And if we need to talk about it later, we do that privately without the child around, and let's be sure we do get on the same page. But that trust between the parents together, the spouses, that's great. That's a great thought. Yeah, we can quickly undermine the other parent if we're not careful.
And that shows the child.
Yes. Yes, and it will take zero time for that child to figure out how to exploit it for his or her benefit. Right. Yeah. All right. What else? Anybody else come up with anything this past week that breaks trust? Yeah. Okay. That's a meaty one. That's a thick one. What was over here?
Lack of respect.
Okay. Lack of respect. Yeah. Yeah. If they hear us say we need to respect everybody, but then they see us mistreating anybody, not showing respect, they're going to wrestle with what in the world? How am I supposed to live with this parent that I trust showing disrespect? Lying is a deep one, because then he followed up with saying one thing but doing another, which is obviously a form of lying. So, yeah, those are big. Let me go ahead and show you what I've come up with. And these are ones that I found scriptural support for. There could be others, I suppose. If you want to take a screenshot of this or whatever you can, we won't go over them tonight. But be thinking on these further, and if you have a chance to write them down real quick or take a picture of them or get a picture from Ryan or James or Matt, Stacy, Jeremy, Nelson, Kathy, anybody who's taken one, you can try to get a picture of it.
I was going to say, like, from the time I started being a stay-at-home mom, and I know y'all didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Sure.
We're all blessed to do that, but children mimic everything you do.
Uh-huh.
Even with, like Annie James, she used to watch me, obviously, clean the house.
Uh-huh.
So she'd get her little broom out
Uh-huh.
and everything, and yes, she's a girl.
Right.
But Anderson,
Uh-huh.
he does the same thing.
Sure.
He just maneuvers and figures out, he wants the big vacuum.
Right, right.
And everything, but that's just an example of, so showing kindness to people who, can't do anything for you, or,
Yes.
you know what I mean, like all those things.
Right.
And being consistent, and, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
It's not our fault, but, you do those things, they're watching.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, deep down, God designed them all to grow into adults. They learn to be adults, the adults in their lives. And so from the basic chores of life, they learn that. But these spiritual things we're talking about, raising them to be faithful spiritually, that's also going to be true. And so we have to be able to see the same plane. And the phrase that I have almost kind of thought of in my mind over the past several months of thinking through this is that we typically undervalue parenting, but we also overthink it. Like there's no super complex formula. Like everything about it is hard, yes, but it's also a somewhat straightforward formula, which is live it, and then along the way teach it while you're living it. Model it, and along the way be able to teach it. That typically is what God requires. And so, very powerful, very good stuff. All right, we'll come back, go through this list somewhat quickly next week, just so that we can keep from kind of establishing some landmines that would ruin or destroy the environment of trust. And I can explain more kind of what I mean by those descriptions next week, and we can dive into the text a little bit and see what those say. Thank you for your time. Look forward to next week.